In a world where most people watch movies and then forget about them, these brave heroes join forces to watch them again and then talk about them. Join them in their epic journey as they go back in time, a decade and beyond, to revisit and break down films from a vast array of genres. Do these movies hold up over time? Are they classics? Find out on Retro Movie Roundtable. Starring your hosts, Brian Fry, Chad Robinson, Dustin Melbardis, Lizzy Haynes, and Russell Guest. Coming now to headphones in your ears.
Welcome all you lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable, where we watch movies and then talk about them. I'm your host, Dustin Melbardis, and joining me today is my good friend and co-host, Lizzy Haynes. Lizzy, how's the new year treating you?
Dustin, new year, same me.
Yes.
But I am excited for 2023 and what it has in store. I'm looking forward to it.
I haven't talked to you since before Christmas. Can you tell me, in your household, was there one gift exchanged that just really lit up the room for everybody? It might have been something you gave or something you received.
Yes. So my husband and I decided to just pour all of the big ticket items for our kids. And so we said this year, let's just go really sentimental. And so we decided to go as cheesy as humanly possible with each other. He made me this beautiful photo album of like all these pictures from us from when we started dating
Cute.
up until now with like little captions. And then I made him, fun little fact about us, we save all of our cards like for anniversaries and birthdays and whatnot. And so I made a little compilation of our cards, extra cheese, but I got to say, we both loved it. There were some happy tears going on in the house on Christmas Day. It was great.
To be in love. I remember what that felt like once.
Well, the bigger the cheese, the better the marriage.
Well, hey, what a lesson for all of our listeners. I love it.
That's right.
I feel like that would make a great tattoo.
Who is that? We'll get to her in a minute. I got a Ninja Air Fryer 10-in-1. My new favorite thing.
Hey.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is amazing.
Got it from my company.
An air fryer is a game changer.
Yeah. Well, you might have heard that voice. We've got a returning guest. Listeners may remember her voice from last year's installment of The Big Boat Boys with Dustin and Nathan, where we featured Deep Rising. Coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, it's Jodi Donnelly. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Did you want to say something about a Christmas gift you got, maybe from the Nate Man?
Nathan was kind enough to get me the art book for Avatar Way of Water, and he actually ordered it before the movie even came out. So he knows me very well. Just give me the creature stuff. So much creature design. I'm just glad to be back on Pandora, man.
I guess you were so excited about the art book because you're an artist and convention goer. Tell the people where they can find out more about your efforts or maybe the next convention you're scoping out.
So my next scheduled convention is actually an anime convention, KatsuCon, down in the National Harbor, D.C. It come February 16th to 18th, I believe. If I remember off the top of my head. But it's but yeah, I'm the artist behind painting dragon feathers, and I specialize in all kinds of creature art, whether it be dioramas, fossil replicas, watercolor illustration, tattoo design. Give me your creepy, cutie, cuddly creatures of all kinds, real, mythical, and extinct.
I feel like that wasn't your motto, but now it should be.
Yes.
Give me your scaly, your furry, your feathered masses.
That's good. That's good. Well, today's movie is an animated movie. So, JD, what movie is your favorite for the look and style?
I am a big fan of the highly detailed animated movie was Jorge Gutierrez. He did The Book of Life, which was a animated film about the Mexican Day of the Dead. Just the level of detail, especially when there's a human hand having to draw, or in the case of like a 3D rendered movie, which by the way, I have no bias either way. I have the nostalgia for hand-drawn movies because I was a kid of the 90s and grew up on, movies older than that.
Right.
But I remember the birth. I was there, Gandalf.
How about you, Lizzy? What's your favorite animated movie for the look and style?
I really love, I'm kind of a Disney purist. So to me, I really love just the Beauty and the Beast hand-drawn style of animation. To me, a lot like JD was saying, that's really what I grew up on. So there's a sense of nostalgia for me with those types of movies, but then also this almost kind of intimate relationship from animator to viewer, because you know that just so much detail and time went into having to draw those characters. And yeah, there's just nothing like it.
Yeah, there's a love and heart that goes into that work that is being done by a human being. I think that's pretty neat.
Yes.
For me, I was trying to come up with several answers like this, and I realized that in my head, the first thing that came to mind was actually stop motion animation. So Nightmare Before Christmas is awesome for me. I remember learning about that with Wallace and Gromit back in the 90s. I'm not the biggest Wallace and Gromit fan, but I appreciate it because of the work. So Nightmare Before Christmas with that style kind of is number one for me. I think I have a lot of feelers into other styles, but that I couldn't shake that when I was thinking about this movie. JD, what's the last movie you saw?
The last movie I saw was the second viewing of Avatar: Way of Water.
The second viewing. Nice.
Which, granted, that was also a movie so highly detailed, and honestly, you can claim there's a lot of animation in it because of all the CGI effects for the creatures and the people. It's like almost like an I Spy. Like, it's like, oh, I noticed this on this viewing and this on that viewing. Oh, I forgot about that part. Oh, I made this connection on this part because now this part makes sense.
Well, without saying too much, because I know Lizzy hasn't seen it yet, maybe the most appropriate thing to say about how things are animated is that when they say this movie is the way of water, they aren't kidding. And there's a lot about the ocean. Right? We move away from the jungles to the coast, and boy, is it breathtaking.
I am afraid of the ocean. I don't know, you might not be able to spoil it, but just as a disclaimer, I'm very afraid of the ocean. So now I'm going in a little anxious, and then I start.
This installment is very shallow water, coral reef friendly.
Okay.
James Cameron's one of the few people that has gone down into the Marianas Trench, and supposedly they incorporated some footage that he filmed down there into the movie.
Oh, that's cool.
Which I was like, yes, deep sea Pandora, give me the deep sea ecosystems.
I feel like when we get to that part, though, that's where, Lizzy, you might want to go and get some popcorn.
Yeah, that part is what scares me. Like, for context, my heart completely stopped in Jurassic World when, like, the sea dinosaur comes up. Like, I think I literally just, like, I just, like, heart and butt. Like, I just, like, couldn't. It was just so awful.
If it's any reassurance, the one in the Jurassic World movie is extremely large. Like, much, much larger than what even the largest specimen ever found would have existed. Like, 3 times the size. They would have been smaller than that.
No, my worst fear. Being, like, in open water. That poor assistant. Like, I'll just never get over it. It was just so scary.
I love that. What's the last movie you saw?
So confession is that I have been cheating on movies with television. So the last movie that I saw was a Christmas movie, and it was The Night Before. That if you've all seen that, it's a funny Christmas movie. It's Seth Rogen, Anthony Mackie, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It is where the premise of the movie is that the 3 of them have this tradition that they always spend Christmas together as a family, their own chosen family. And Seth Rogen is about to have a baby. And so this is going to be the very last time that they do that before they embark on their lives starting to change. And there's a lot of illegal drugs and a lot of just bad behavior, kind of just as there would be in any Seth Rogen movie.
Par for the course.
Just like there would be when you get the guys back together, you know?
Really, really funny. And that might be a new Christmas tradition for my husband and I on Christmas Eve to watch The Night Before together after doing all of the, the appropriate Santa things.
I will tell you the last movie I saw was called Sha Po Lang from 2005, starring Donnie Yen, Wu Jing, Sammo Hung, and Tony Jaa. I was just in the mood to watch a kung fu movie, and Donnie Yen uses a blackjack as his primary weapon, like a baton, an extendable baton, and he does some cool work with that, especially against Wu Jing, who wields like a dueler's knife. Kind of neat for me, but it was just I needed an action fix, so I got it. But, we've talked a little bit about anime. We've talked about creatures that are bigger than they should be. Lizzy, can you tell me what movie we're covering tonight?
Yes, we are going to be talking about Nausica of the Valley of the Wind.
Starring Sumi Shimamoto, Goro Naya, Yoji Matsuda, Yoshiko Sakakibara, and Iyamasa Kayumi. starring many others in the English dub, but I was giving for the Japanese subtitles, released in 1984. Budget of $758,000, translated from the 180 million yen. And then that's 14.3 million domestically. And we're using some overseas box office numbers there, so don't hold us to it. The number one movie that year was Beverly Hills Cop. Hey, I know of a podcast that covered that just last year. Real popular downloader, too. The IMDb rating for this movie is 8.0. Rotten Tomatoes, our critics' tomato meter is 89%, and our audience score is 87%. Now, this is also, I'm going to say, Studio Ghibli movie. Is that correct, JD?
Yeah, that's more or less.
And that's what happens is we have an entire culture being introduced to this probably later than the Japanese fans would have been introduced to it. But I think that's something that attracts viewers, and it attracts a higher score. People go into it wanting to really enjoy this Studio Ghibli stuff. JD, had you ever seen this movie before?
I had, not for a while though. Like, this was honestly not my first Studio Ghibli film. The first one I watched, I should say knowingly, because I did remember watching Kiki's Delivery Service, which is a very charming Ghibli movie. It was aired on Disney, and I watched it like, oh, this is a great movie, without knowing what it was Studio Ghibli or even knowing what anime was. The first Ghibli movie I watched that was consciously aware that it was both an anime imported from Japan and Studio Ghibli, and specifically by Hayao Miyazaki. The one I did consciously watch was Spirited Away, which is one of the only ones, I think it got nominated for Best Picture the year it got released in the US. It was like 2001. I remember I got a VHS copy of it for Easter. I popped that bad boy in the VCR. It did not leave the VCR for a week straight. Just constant, as soon as it was over, rewind and rewatch it. And then I was like, I need to find more. After that, when like along with like Castle in the Sky and Porco Rosso, and most of his work got dubbed by Disney in the like early to mid 2000s.
You know, the way I listened to what you just said about how it entered your life early, I feel like it's like a really easy lure and catch, that the things you're seeing on the screen and the colors can really, like, it's not hard to catch the attention of the kids introduced to it young.
As I say, I mean, like, I was early teens, mid-teens, and I was gonna say, laughing humans.
You're young.
We're attracted to motion and the color red. So, like, I'm talking like on an instinctual, primal lizard brain level.
So yeah, you had quite the experience. How about you, Lizzy? Had you seen this before?
No, I had never seen this movie before, and confession is that this was the very first anime movie that I have ever seen in my life. I have never seen an anime movie.
This is a good one to cut your teeth on. But I will say this is like the start of Miyazaki. This is like his first full-length movie that was his own original idea, and not because his first movie was technically a Lupin the Third movie, and you get to see, like, I'll talk about some Miyazaki quirks and tropes later. But, like, this is not him at the height of his power, so to speak.
My brother was really into Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon and things like that. So, I mean, I'm familiar with what anime is. I never really considered myself its target audience.
Anime is just kind of like a style of artwork. So there's different genres. There's thrillers, mysteries, sci-fi, action, adventure. And I will say, like, Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon, A, they're both episodic TV series. B, they are very, very tropey in the action adventure. Like, for girls, Sailor Moon would be shoujo. Shoujo means girl. So, like, Sailor Moon was, like, the quintessential shoujo action series, while Dragon Ball Z is the quintessential shonen meaning boy, action series.
My husband, on the other hand, he's a pretty big anime fan. So when I told him that I had to watch this movie, I was like, do you want to watch an anime movie with me tonight? He's like, 100% yes. And then we're sitting on the couch together, and as the opening credits start, he looks right over at me and he's like, I can't believe this. Like, I can't believe you're watching this movie with me. I had no idea what to expect. I'm going to be completely blunt and completely honest. Because I'd never seen anything like this before, my expectations were really low. And I really liked it. I thought it was a great story. I think The character development was really compelling. You can definitely tell it's a movie of the 80s because there's just like amazing boppy music that kind of tells you how you're supposed to feel in each moment of the movie. And I love Nausica as a character. You know, she's just this sweet princess that has power and is, you know, she's powerful and strong, but yet she doesn't.
We got a whole podcast to do this with, Lizzy.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. I'm rambling. I just really liked it.
No, that's actually good, and I'm gonna keep it in because you kind of want to talk about this movie. It's part of the experience is that it's now that you've seen it, you are part of it. I'm on the same level with Lizzy here. I'd never seen it before. And I was lucky to have several friends who are anime fans, both of the things that Lizzy was beginning to describe, the heroic, trope-filled, early stuff introduced by American producers who said, I think this is something that our kids would like, the Dragon Balls and Sailor Moons of the world. And then they also knew the historic stuff, the important stuff, the Lupin III, the things from manga, that kind of thing. And I thought it was really neat to have the chance to ask them when you provided the short list, JD, hey, y'all, which one should we start with? And it started a spirited debate of like, oh, hey, which one should you start with? But this one came out on top, and we ended up agreeing that we'll start with Nausica. It's hard for me to answer questions like if it holds up or not, because I really do think its lessons, I think we'll get into that after the break, its lessons are sort of throughout history, positive ones. And I think of like the style of the time, like it's almost as if it was made to hold up through history. And that's a positive thing. You know, there are some things we cover here that very clearly don't, but this movie, I feel like was appropriate to watch for any time and for any age. I don't feel like there was anything in this movie that was like too directed towards children or too directed towards like only adults will get that theme. So I thought it was wonderful, and I definitely enjoyed it while watching.
I would say part of that definitely is a cultural thing, because not to say that American children's media talks down to its audiences, but also like the age of maturation in Japan's a bit older, or a bit younger. So like they treat their kids more maturely at a younger age. So they don't necessarily balk at tackling tough discussions. I will also say too, typically for Miyazaki, I think the only movie of his that has above a PG rating is Princess Mononoke, which is rated PG-13.
Okay. Well, you know, there's an example that I'll want to bring up after the break, but you know, there are certain things that I think they really could have leaned into if you were to approach it from like child audience based, like things that you could merchandise or market. I think they really could have leaned in that direction, and I see this more as art than I see it as a production for profit, which is another thing that I think kind of keeps it in this little microcosm of just a pleasant watch, as opposed to the start of some big franchise. You know, we know that the studio is successful, but maybe that's part of what makes the studio successful, is that the things it makes are, I think, artistic first. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I will say, now that you mentioned Ghibli has become much more of a recognizable name, and they actually just made a Ghibli theme park over in Japan. I think it opened last year, and it's starting to get on the merchandising side. Like if you go to Barnes and Noble or Hot Topic, you can walk in and see merchandise. But that's because it's been introduced to the West, and kids want little plushies of fox squirrels. And once upon a time, I did have a plushie of Tato the Fox Squirrel, and I think I might have purged it when I moved, unfortunately.
Oh, well, I understand that. I understand that sort of global push towards how do we turn this into something more. Yeah, well, speaking of storytelling, we actually are going to go over the plot of this movie when we get back from our advertisement break. So stay tuned. Go check out Nausica of the Valley of the Wind and come back, because if you don't watch it by the time you come back, Lizzy's going to spoil stuff for you. We'll see you after the break.
Welcome to the All 80s Movies Podcast.
I'm Bill.
And I'm Jason. And this is the podcast where we talk about the blockbusters, the flops, and everything in between from one of the freshest decades for movies, the 1980s. So whether you're a brain, a jock, a valley girl, or a Jedi, we've got some 80s classics for you.
Do these movies stand the test of time? Are we discovering something new? Is there an 80s movie we're finally watching for the first time?
Join us each week as we dive into the cinematic nostalgia that inspired and influenced a generation. From the hits to the cult classics, we'll discuss our earliest memories, favorite scenes, fun facts, and our not-so-favorite movie moments too.
It's the All 80s Movies Podcast, now available on all major streaming platforms. Please subscribe and happy listening.
All right, and we are back. This is your final warning. We are about to spoil the plot of Nausica of the Valley of the Wind. Lizzy, take it away.
All right, guys, buckle up. Our movie opens with a brief history of the world that 1,000 years prior, giant warriors destroyed civilization, leaving behind waste, which resulted in the majority of the world as a toxic jungle overrun with huge deadly insects called Olmos. Nausica, a young and extraordinarily kind princess who lives in the Valley of the Wind, a small valley surrounded by neighboring kingdoms that are at war with one another. Nausica enjoys roaming around the jungle with protective gear, trying to find any remnants of civilization. There she happens upon a fellow voyager being chased by an Olm. The Olm is chasing the voyager with red eyes, blinded by rage. Nausica, using an insect charm, is able to calm the Olm down and reason with it to not cause harm. The voyager reveals himself to be Lord Yupa, a good friend who also lives in the Valley of the Wind. Together they go back to the valley where Lord Yupa and Nausicaa's father, along with a wise oracle, Opapa, discuss Lord Yupa's travels to the neighboring kingdoms. Then Yupa shares that the kingdoms around him are suffering. The toxins are spreading and both kingdoms are behaving like savages. Papa shares that she knows how this will all end and prays soon for the ancient fulfillment of a prophecy in which a man in blue will emerge from fields of gold and will save the world. That night, an unknown ship flies over the valley and the townspeople panic. Nausica boards her glider to try to warn the ship that it must land before it will crash. She recognizes the ship as a Tolmekian ship. She recognizes a Pedjite passenger named Listel. The ship crashes and engulfs in flames. The young girl warns Nausicaa to burn the ship and everything in it, as the ship holds deadly insects that will leave behind toxic spores. Lord Yupa discovers on board an embryo of a giant warrior, one that will return and, if released, will wreak havoc on the world and make it an even worse apocalyptic state. Lord Yupa worries for the valley and the rest of the world should this warrior be released. Shortly after, Tolmekian troops arrive in the valley led by a warrior princess Kushana, and they occupy the valley, execute Nausicaa's father, and take back the embryo that they had in their possession before the ship crashed. Kushana reveals her plan to release the warrior and allow him to burn the toxic jungle, thinking that this act of violence will allow for a new world. Nausicaa runs to find solace in her room, where Lord Yupa finds her, surrounded by lush spores and plants from the toxic jungle. At first, he panics, but then he realizes that the air is clean. Nausicaa reveals that with clean soil, the plants are safe, leading her to question everything she knows to be true about the toxic jungle and the insects that guard it. Nausicaa is taken prisoner by Kushana along with 5 hostages while they board her ship. On board, they are attacked by a Pedjite ship and shoots down and crashes into the jungle. In doing so, it awakes several insects. Nausicaa runs off to look for the Pedjite pilot, where she instructs the hostages to return home if she doesn't come back. Nausicaa finds the pilot and learns that he is Abel, Listel's brother. Quickly, the two of them are engulfed into quicksand, which takes them beneath the jungle. There she discovers that the air is also clean. It's clean by a process in which the plants are purifying the topsoil and producing clean water and soil below the surface. She then has the realization that the insects are not hostile in the sense that they want to destroy mankind, but rather they want to protect the land from being further destroyed by mankind. Nausicaa and Abel, now with this new information, run to return to Pedjite, but before they can, they are met by a band of Pedjites who plan to lure the insects into the valley where the Tolmekians continue to occupy and destroy the entire valley and all who reside, Tolmekians and valley villagers. Nausicaa escapes their grasp with the help of Listel and Abel's mother, who recognizes that this is not the way for peace. Nausicaa sees that they're using a baby Olm as bait to lure the pack of Olms into the valley. Meanwhile, back in the valley, Kushana releases the Great Warrior, hoping that her plan of incinerating the world will come to fruition. However, the warrior is not fully developed and collapses. Nausica manages to calm the baby Olm down, but not before being run over by the pack. The townspeople of the valley are saved, but devastated that their princess has fallen. Suddenly, the Olms' rage end, and they revive Nausica using their golden tentacles. Nausicaa's dress, once red, now blue, after being drenched in Olm blood, emerges through fields of gold, fulfilling the ancient prophecy and saving the world.
And saving the world. And then in our credits scene, we get a nice little montage of what happens to the world after. Which I think, when speaking with some of the other hosts of this show, frequently we want more. But based on that plot summary, we got a lot in this movie. And I was happy to have just a little montage at the end. Oh, look how happy they are. Oh, he's writing with him. That's great. So, what is it about this movie that lingers in your mind longer? The story, the adventure that Nausicaa goes on, or the lesson, the underwriting lesson of everything?
I think for me, it was the lesson. I think that Nausicaa practices this great philosophy that I'm going to say it was given before. I know it wasn't, but I saw this movie first. So in my mind, it comes first. And I've been talking to this about my son a lot because we're talking about responsibility. And in the words of the great wise Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. And I feel like Nausicaa perfectly emulates that in the sense that she has strength and she knows how to wield that strength, but she's gentle and she's kind. And when she does have moments where she loses her temper, there's guilt and she recognizes that it's wrong. And I think she's a really wonderful princess. She's flawed in the sense that we all are, but she's gracious. And I think she's a really wonderful representation of a princess.
I did write in my notes when I was watching this that Nausicaa, her greatest weapon is love. And I think so too. Yeah. And I don't mean it like, for me, I would say it is also the lesson. It's definitely the environmental lesson, because that's also an ongoing trope that Miyazaki explores in multiple of his films, including Princess Mononoke, and even to a degree just cohabitation. So in both this movie and Princess Mononoke, it's cohabitation between man and industrialization and nature, but whereas like Spirit Away, it's cohabitation between the spirit world and the human and like humans and the mortal realm. Porco Rosso, the different sides of World War I, all that kind of stuff. And also too, because my specialty is creatures and monsters, there's the great, watching this now that I'm older and have some years of creature study under my belt, something that definitely stuck with me, I realized upon this viewing, a great big old analogy is the giant warriors, because they're a big analogy for the destructiveness of, say, the atomic bomb, which the Japanese country obviously suffered. So I give a creature creation panel at conventions sometimes where I talk about creature design, and a quote I borrow to talk about from another convention speaker named Charles Dunbar, who gives amazing lectures on Japanese culture, history, and stuff like that, is if you want to understand what a culture fears, look at its monsters. So this movie, they literally took the devastating effects of nuclear war and made it a literal monster. Giant insects are not hostile in like, humans are protein snacks.
Like at a base level, yeah, they're
Yes.
they're not hunting humans.
No,
that way.
They have a kind of a sentience. Like they're more or less have turned to Earth's immune system, and humans are the virus. Dun dun dun.
you know,
a great way of putting it.
There's something there I had written down, and this is a tremendous bounce even for me to jump to the very end of our superlatives. But I wrote 3 quotes that I wanted to bring up later, but I'm going to bring up 2 of them now based on what you two ladies just said. First of all, when I brought up lessons, I was actually thinking of the more environmentalism and anti-war lessons. And Lizzy, you jumped right into love and responsibility, which I think is, well, indicative of being a super mom. But 2, it's just another great way to look at this Eastern portrayal of princess, which I think we'll get into in a bit. But the talking of love as the lesson, the trailer for this movie, which also features a bop, the tagline of it is, "A young girl's love called forth miracles." I didn't know that from the watching the movie. I saw it in the trailer afterwards. And then with JD, what you were mentioning is look at to what a culture fears in its monsters. There's toward the end of the movie where we have Obaba say, "There's no reason to live if our lives depend on a monster." And boy, does that not encapsulate what you were mentioning about this incredibly destructive force, these great warriors. Is that right? Is that what they were called?
First off, just to address the ohm in the room, I listened to the Disney dub. I have not actually watched the original Japanese audio with subtitles.
They're called giant warriors in the Japanese subtitle movie, because that's what I watched.
Yeah, in the English dub, they also call them the giant warriors. I will say, too, something about the insects is, you want to understand what culture fears, look at its monsters. They could have gone with all kinds of creature design for what kind of entities would have evolved from this toxic jungle. And I feel they went with insects because insects, if you look at the animal kingdom, are the most scuttly and alien. They're the most unlike. Like, there's some empathy towards mammals. There's empathy towards reptiles. Because, hey, they have 4 legs. They move around. Like, obviously, she gets a sidekick of a fox squirrel, 2 highly sympathetic animals that people love, foxes and squirrels. But, like, if you want to go the opposite end of the spectrum, if you want to skeeve people out, you go with bugs. Multiple legs, multiple eyes, hard carapaces. And you can see it in how the people react, even the people of the Valley of the Wind, basically everyone but Nausica. Nausicaa's one of the only people who sees the insects as part of the biome. They're just like, oh, they're just like living their lives. She has a bug charm, so she can communicate with them to a degree without having to harm them. And she warns people, don't fire your guns, don't shoot them, you're just going to make them angry. You're going to trigger the hive swarm antibody response. But everyone else is terrified of them because they're like, oh, the insects, they attack, they eat us. Spoiler alert, you find out Kushana is missing some limbs from insect attacks.
It's a straight up 1-to-1. As a world, we need our bugs. We need them. And what does the Earth have as response? So in my version, it was called the Sea of Decay, which is with all of these spores and this place where it's toxic for people to breathe. What's it called in the dubbed version? Is it something similar?
Toxic jungle.
The toxic jungle. Okay, so I have a feeling that there's going to be some things that aren't quite 1-to-1 here. But yeah, the Sea of Decay is what it's called in the Japanese audio. And
I like the Sea of Decay. I like that. That sounds, I'm afraid of the ocean from 20 minutes ago, but
yeah,
it is. There's something about the ocean, like even in the Bible, when talking about the sea and the waters, they're referring to chaos.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something just very chaotic about open water, and so I like Sea of Decay.
The Sea of Decay. That's where the insects are protecting. This Sea of Decay and the insects are protecting this world. They're protecting the Earth. What do we learn through the plot of this movie? Is that to me, this is a natural response to the terrors that humanity has inflicted on the Earth. And we're in a position, let's take it in the far swing from Fern Gully here. We're in the position where the forest is won. The Earth is winning. The Sea of Decay swallows up kingdoms by the year. And what do we learn throughout? What's underneath the Sea of Decay? The wonderful, pure place where things are breathable and safe and sterile in the most natural way. Again, because if you leave humans to their own devices, we're gonna destroy things. And we did. And so we're this far into, hey, listen, the only people worth saving in this movie, I actually mentioned, I wrote this down in my notes. There's no good guys outside of the Valley of the Wind, are there? As a civilization-wise. In the Japanese dub, his name is written as Absol. I'm going to call him Abel because it's easier. Abel He's maybe the only character outside of the Valley of the Wind villagers who I think has any really redeeming qualities. Everybody else is just like, well, we're part of the war effort. Like, we're doing what we can to fight back and destroy even more. And they bring that destruction to the Valley of the Wind. Most of what we get, aside from, and you mentioned the Valley villagers aren't really like, we love nature either. Anytime they see a spore, they go out with their flamethrowers and destroy it. At least they've got their little paradise. But yeah, the most of outside of the Valley of the Wind is, no, we're going to beat the Earth at its own game. Spoiler alert, that never wins.
I know in the English dub, at least, in a scene near the end, Obaba, which, by the way, they named the old lady the old lady character's name is Old Lady.
Old Lady.
Old Lady. That's great.
But anyway, Obaba says we've learned. Maybe it's not Obaba. It's one of the elders of the village, at least, that says we learned to use fire in small amounts. So it's definitely more about coexisting. It's not about complete decimation, like what they want to use with the warriors. Yeah, Pedjite and Tomikia, they're kind of Game of Thronesing it in the remnants of the Mad Max-esque world with more bugs. But I would say they're not inherently evil. They're just they're scared, and scared people do stupid stuff, including wage war. And Kushana in particular, like, she does have a sympathetic motive. She was horribly maimed by these insects, so she understands that it's hostile. It's not described as inherently evil. It's just a hostile environment.
I'm gonna swing hard the other way with this whole, all right, that these kingdoms aren't inherently evil. Let's take a look at real world 2023. We know that we are on a countdown to destruction in our world, and that we have floating islands of plastic garbage in our oceans. And we know that there are dangers to the way that we have lived, like have formed our cultures in the way that they destroy environments. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe this is where I detach from well, that's not inherently evil, because look at all the people we can feed, or look at all the things that we've done for industry. But it's pretty close that we are fighting and we're almost trying our best to destroy the Earth. And I don't know how close to the line of inherently evil that is, but there's a reason why we've had to, like, step back, and why in the 80s, what was it? Chlorofluorocarbons, like, hey, in our aerosol, we can't use this anymore. And why we make the steps to be like, all right, hey, we can't keep hurting the Earth that bad. We can keep hurting the Earth some ways, but not that bad. Now, I'm not trying to get too political here, but the idea is, I think in the world of Nausica of the Valley of the Wind, where we're 1,000 years past the 7 days fire, whatever that was.
The 7 days of fire. Which when it comes to apocalyptic names, that's actually pretty badass.
Pretty awesome. Is that we already did this. And I think that this is a great, stepping stone towards some of the other post-apocalyptic worlds that we saw maybe 15 years later, is we already did these things, and we're living in the aftermath. The toxic jungle, as you guys have it in your version, and the Sea of Decay is the tide coming back. It's the Earth fighting back. And there's a part of me watching this movie saying, like, man, the kingdoms of man deserve it. We've deserved this encroachment. But what does the Earth do to forgive? Underneath the toxic jungle, the world is safe under there. And there's a bunch of guardian bugs in the way, but it does make me think a lot about what the future of the world of Nausica of the Valley of the Wind could be. Which is, well, I don't know, is there some type of natural symbiosis between the Ohm, the other insects, and the world? Or is there eventually some great migration to the safe places beneath the Sea of Decay? I don't know. These are questions I was left with, but I do like the thought experiment.
I think the overall, because I honestly had that thought too at the end, was like, okay, Nausica solved this problem, but what's the long game for humanity?
Sure, yeah.
And I think the point that was implied was that because she definitely had a made an imprint on Kushana, the warlike princess, because she was like literally jaw agape, starstruck when she saw Nausica handling the insects peacefully, like to the point that she was able, like that the one guy was able to come up and just completely disarm her, just like take the gun, like, hey, I'm gonna take this gun away from you now, and she didn't even fight it. She was just
That's right. Oh yeah, when they're in the sort of lake area. Yeah, after the gunship and the other ship were just sort of floating on the water.
Yeah, and then near the end of the movie, when Kushana and her Tolmekian forces are fighting against the Wind Valiers that are hiding out in the old submarine on the in the English dub, it was the Sea of the Acid Lake.
The Acid Lake is same here.
Okay, yeah. And she's like, no, we're gonna wait for they're like, her second in command, the Weasley dude's like, why don't we just attack them? And she's like, no, I want to wait for see if Nausicaa's gonna show up, see if she actually accomplishes what she says she's going to. And I don't know if it's in your version, but in the English dub, she says a line at some point where she's like, if Nausicaa manages to get out of the jungle and come back, she's like, I'd like to get to know her. If she manages to survive all this crazy insect drama. So I think the idea is that Nausicaa's ways of empathy and love rub off on the Pedgites and the Tolmekians. Yeah. And they might learn to become more cohabitating in a more gentle way, with a more symbiotic way, like the Wind Valiers. Even just how they're presented with how each culture interacts with the natural world around them.
But Lizzy, what are some other things about Nausicaa herself that are inspiring, entertaining, maybe for the kids? Like a shining example, there's a gentle style to the way that she flies and the way that she even speaks.
I think she just really leads with love, which I think in terms of thinking about how things are going to be for the rest of the world, I think that when she's going to hopefully leave behind this legacy of, like, when you get your mind right, things just kind of naturally fall into place. So I think she really emulates that so well. She has such patience. She has like all of the like amazing fruits of the spirit, and the fact that like when that little fox squirrel like lands on her like right in the very beginning and like gets ready to bite her. This was like probably one of my favorite scenes in the movie, where she just is like, I'm not going to hurt you. And the fox even bites her. And even in that moment, she still maintains her cool and her calm. And I loved that scene because to me, that was so foreshadowing of just her character. She always has a plan. Like anytime that things go awry, you know,
she's cool under pressure too. Like
she's so cool. And yes, she's like, okay, like hostages, you go here. I'm going to go here. And she just has this very, like, it doesn't matter where you come from, I'm not going to leave you behind mentality. Like, you know, when the ship crashes, she probably had every opportunity to just completely ditch the Kushana. And also same with the Pedgite pilot that with Abel ran them down. You know, she didn't know at the time that Abel was Lestelle's brother and was good, but it didn't stop her from
snatching him from the pincers of that flying centipede.
Yes. And I think she emulates this like amazing life philosophy of who they are won't stop me from being who I am. You know, she just really, like, these people around her are acting like savages. You know, the Pedgites are supposed to be somewhat peaceful in comparison to the Tolmekians. So you hear Abel talking about how there's bloodthirsty Tolmekians, but in the end, the Pedgites end up being, you know, they're just as bad. And so I think, talking specifically about Nausicaa, I just really love that she, all in all, is a very rooted and grounded princess who always has her eye on the prize, which is making sure that no matter what she does, her actions are moving towards whatever is going to lead with love. You know, you get the little sequence afterwards where it gives you a montage of what's going to happen afterwards, and you really get this sense that everybody's going to live happily ever after because they've kind of caught on that love is going to be what's most important.
Speaking of happily ever after and princesses, how does this movie serve as a foil for how our Western animation studios have presented princesses?
I think, well, I mean, we're finally starting to tiptoe away from the princesses that I grew up with. But to me, it was, you are either fall into one of two categories. You're either a total damsel in distress, or you are someone that is just looking for love rather than being somebody that leads with love. I think probably the best comparison we have to Nausica in the Western world would probably be Cinderella, just because her superpower in a sense is her kindness. But if you look at a different princess like Sleeping Beauty, she's everywhere. And, when you think of a Disney princess, she's usually one of the first that come to mind. Her main goal, and same with Ariel and a lot of these princesses, is about finding love. Yes, it's like, I want to find love rather than understanding that love can be something that you harness within yourself. And I think that that's a really lovely lesson that I think is important for all children, but especially for young girls.
It's like a reactionary. Your story is actually about being found by a prince. Yes,
exactly.
And no princes here. We've got our 2 strong princesses, and they are revered by the people in their worlds. I mean, Nausica is held up as essentially the best of what the Valley of the Wind has to offer. And with Kushana, she leads in a military style the little dude beneath her, Kuratawa. That guy, the counselor. I mean, we've got some side cast here. Whether it's Kuratawa or whether it's Abel, maybe it's Lord Yupa.
Might be slightly biased because in the English dub he is voiced by Sir Patrick Stewart, and I can listen to him read the phone book. But I also like him because he's a quiet badass. He's the kind of absolute unit of a character. Like, his reputation precedes him.
Yeah, that's true.
It precedes him so well, he doesn't have to demonstrate it. Like, I think of that Game of Thrones quote, like, a king doesn't have to say he's king.
Yes.
So, I like characters like that. Like, you don't have to that just quietly demonstrate their power or know, if there's a part earlier in the movie where Nausicaa's dad is like, hey, why don't you come settle in the Valley of the Wind? And he's like, no, I got to go around and find out. Like, he's not tied to any specific nation. He's more like a representation of the entirety of humanity. Like, he knows the Pedgites, he knows the Tomikians, he knows everybody. He's the guy that knows everybody.
And they know about him. I believe when he jumps onto the ship, one of the Tolmekian commanders saying, all right, boys, this is your chance to find honor, because here comes Lord Yupa. And I think he immediately takes 3 of them down and grabs the commander by the throat, knife right underneath it.
That was my superlative. That's Lord Yupa. If you kill him, you'll be famous.
We'll bring it up later.
That's right.
But I will say,
famous.
He doesn't have to be that hands-on in this movie. It really is Nausicaa's story. Nausicaa and Abel, who Abel is representative of the Pedgite people, who, I will admit, I only watched it once. And so there were some of the very recent history of the kingdoms that weren't completely clear to me. But the Pedgite kingdom, where the Great Dome was just recently destroyed by Olmos.
Mm-hmm.
And was that is there any indication, was that due to them meddling with the baby Olm?
Yeah, it was implied that the Pedgites had lured the insects in. I don't think it was the same baby Olm that's seen later, but they
were messing with things they really shouldn't
They
have.
triggered the Olm to come attack because they were under attack by Tomikia. So it's like, oh, enemy of your enemy is my friend. So in this case, let's sick the toxic jungle on our enemies that are trying to invade us. Because it was implied that Tomikia had invaded Pedgite because Pedgite had found the warrior embryo, and when Tomikia heard about it, like, oh, we're gonna invade, and that's why they had Listel on their crashed the ship that was carrying the embryo, because she was
and
a
what
hostage.
Brought the story to Nausicaa in the first place.
She was a hostage, so it was implied that Tomikia had already attacked and invaded, and so the Pedgites, in desperation, turned to weaponize the toxic jungle against them, even if it took out their own city and their own people in the process.
Now, for Lizzy and I, it was our first watch. There were 2 surprising scenes, and I'm not talking big surprises, but just sort of the action moved fast to where I really wondered just how quickly we could pivot towards one thing or another. The first was when Lord Yupa shows up and sees Nausicaa's secret room, the garden. Now, in your plot summary, Lizzy, you were talking about how she was out exploring the jungle, maybe looking for civilization. I remember her taking a very small spore and putting it into a very small vial. And what a wonderful opening scene, by the way, to come across that carapace of the Ohm and to hold it in such reverence. I think that comes across really well in the Japanese audio, the reverence for this great sort of husk of a beast. And then to be underneath the eyelid, eye stalk, eye
shell,
lens, eye shell, whatever it is, while all the rest of the spores come down. It's almost like she's tossing around in freshly fallen snow. Just another visual delight from this movie. But she's out there and she collects that little spore, and I think nothing of it. And then 40 minutes later, we see the secret room. Did you have any emotions come up when the secret room was revealed, seeing what she was up to?
Yes. I mean, I'm not going to lie. When she was like, Lord Yuba, I want you to come back and see my room. And I looked over at Aaron and I was like, that's just like, I don't know where this movie's going. And
what's going on here? Yeah.
And again, like totally, I had no expectation of what I was going to expect. But you know, her father is just executed. She knows that she's going to have to go with Kushana. She's absolutely heartbroken. And she's also really disappointed in herself as well, because, you know, in that moment before running off, she lost her temper. And so she's, I think, just dealing with a gambit of emotions. And so she's in this room. That was probably one of the prettiest scenes that I had in the movie for me. And it was a really interesting pivot where, to me, it's like, okay, all right, so they're like, nothing is what it seems. And that is that excitement that I felt in that moment of realizing, okay, so this movie is going to be about everything unfolding, and that what they believe to be true is absolutely nothing of the sort.
Yeah.
And we all kind of get to make this discovery together. So that was the scene for me where things really changed and my curiosity was fully piqued.
My curiosity was not piqued when Obaba was talking about the prophecy of the blue robe clothed person to come from the golden field. I'm just like, that's some nonsense that doesn't matter.
Clearly that's going to be like Nausica, you know, like...
Well, we didn't know of like the kind of life underneath the toxic jungle. But then, 40 minutes and we see that. And the second scene I was referencing that was a big shock was when the Tolmekians arrive, and it's just like, boom, boom, 30 seconds. Her dad isn't even really trying that hard. King Gilles, he's just holding a sword, bust down the door, instant murder. Like, that like, whoa.
It was also implied he was bedridden. Like, he could not move.
He could not fight for himself, yeah. No, because he was under some type of ailment. Right?
Yeah, it wasn't specified in the English dub. I think it might be. Or rather, it was implied because there was a character later saying, like, oh, I have the same disease as King Gilles.
Mito,
It's from living in proximity to the toxic jungle. So even though they're relatively safe because of the winds in the valley, keeping the valley relatively safe, it's like, having like a chunk of uranium next door.
Yeah, it seemingly almost like 1-to-1, and yeah, it's either Mito or Goal, one of those other kind of three guys.
The peanut gallery.
Yeah, the peanut gallery crew. Well, like apparently there's kind of a sickness that can start to paralyze your limbs. I believe in the Japanese audio says like, yeah, these are eventually I won't be able to move this hand. And Nausica, who greets that with love, is just like, well, those are hands to be proud of because you were a strong, hard worker.
Yep.
But she was secretly working with this sort of underground grow room, greenhouse in a way, to like learn about the pure growing flowers, succulents, plants, whatever they are down there. I think it was implied to like try to find a cure. Now, this is something I want to bring up to both of you. It does seem like the only person in the world that has this knowledge or has this kind of ambition is Nausica. There's nobody else that has any clue.
As far as we see, because we don't know the whole entire world, so to speak.
Right.
But like out of the cast of characters, yeah, she's the only one, like, again, and she also has the greatest empathy. She's also the one seen trying to communicate with the insects as if they are fellow living creatures and not just monsters. So I think it applies to her empathy to a degree too. And also, I had major envy of her garden room. I have plants all over my house. I want that room.
Hey, some people want Belle's library. Some people want Nausicaa's garden room.
That's right. I think what's really interesting is that to your question, Dustin, is that, people tend to make decisions and choices based on their biases. So when everybody is operating under the assumption that these insects are deadly, that they eat us, no one wants to challenge that, because they're not necessarily asking the question of why. They're only focused on the point of, well, these insects must be evil because they're eating us. There's never anybody, at least in the movie, that is challenging that and saying, why do you think that is? And I think Nausica, because she's somebody that leads with love and understanding, and like you said, JD, she's got this sense of empathy. She's willing to try to understand them because she recognizes that they have some type of personality. She's able to charm them and say, with Lord Yupa in the very beginning, she's like, you don't want to hurt him. We're not here to hurt you. Go back to the jungle. She understands that on some level that they can be reasoned with.
Yeah, it's cool.
So, yeah, it's really, really neat. So, I think she's probably the only person that really is willing to challenge that, because she's the only person willing to have empathy for them.
It does go against one of my actual pet peeves, pun intended, when people that have pets talk to their animals as if they can understand the English they're speaking. Animals can understand your emotion, and they can read the muscles in your face greater than other humans can. But as far as actual sentences or paragraphs, they don't get it. But this goes against it. I found myself liking that Nausicaa is, maybe it's just the emotion to the Ohms or to any of the other creatures. We have those cool kind of two-legged ostrich-like mounts. Obviously, we've got the fox squirrel, who, by the way, they don't lean into the fox squirrel being a hero. It's just a companion.
Yeah.
It's not an Abu or an Iago. It's not a Raja. Why am I only thinking of Aladdin here? It's
Flounder, Sebastian.
It's not a Flounder. It's not a Sebastian. It's not a cool gargoyle. It's just there, and it's just fun for the animators to animate, which they did a lot of. Before we get into superlatives, we have to mention the animation, the eye candy. And I think I need to toss it over to you, JD, because this is really your oeuvre.
My overall sentiment of the film is it has the 80s nostalgia to it. And there's something about 80s animation, whether it is Japanese or Western or American, I call it the warm fuzzy. It's just something about, there's a warm fuzziness to 80s animation. You see it in Nausica, Little Nemo.
Little Nemo was one I watched early and did not realize it was sort of the Eastern style.
I believe Miyazaki may have worked on Nemo before he went and made Ghibli. I think
it was not Ghibli. Yeah,
some of his it predates Ghibli, and also Last Unicorn, as animated by Rankin Bass, outsourced some of its animation to Japan as well. But Last Unicorn was an 80s film, 70s or 80s. That whole era of 70s, 80s animation has that warm, kind of fuzzy. Maybe it's because it was, on the CRTVs, on VHS, just that warm
part of it too, yeah.
The soft watercolor. Secret of Nim is another good example from Don Bluth. Hell, most of the Don Bluth library. American Tail, Land Before Time. Something about the movies of that era just have that, maybe it's the hand-natured watercoloring, especially Japanese anime in general is highly known for its highly detailed backgrounds, and a lot of them are hand watercolored, and you definitely see that in the funky Talk to Jungle landscape that is Nausicaa. I will say too, knowing that, looking back and realizing that this is Miyazaki's one of his first movies, I could see, here's the beginning of some of the Ghibli tropes. One of them I call the Ghibli floof, hair floof. When a character gets highly emotional or stressed, their hair floofs out a little bit.
Oh, wow.
Nausica does it in one scene when she's upset. There's also the Ghibli mustache, or the Miyazaki mustache, where it's like a male character will just have a mustache that completely encompasses half their face.
Right. You know, I really considered coming into this record with a big fluffy mustache just because of this movie. But yeah, it's so striking as like, well, that's just how the style of these people here. But yeah, it's just a trope is almost the wrong word. It is the right word, but it's almost the wrong word because typically we like to assign negative things to tropes. And I would say that this movie, if I'm using the negative connotation to trope, was tropeless. The things that it has are positive patterns, we'll say.
Another animation quirk was what I like to call the Ghibli run, which is like when characters run in Ghibli films, it has a very distinct smooth style, and it like pat, 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 pat. Like, also the Foley sound was a lot of fun in this, especially for the like bug noises, the ohm, and very 80s synth noises brought in for the Foley effects. What was another Ghibli? Oh, also Miyazaki in general. A common theme in his movies, along with environmentalism and, you know, peace and cohabitation, is flying and the sky. He's really, really into flying stuff. So you get to see all the big clouds. There was some stellar flight animation, like the scene where the Asbel in the English dub that I listened to, his name was Asbel, not Abel. We don't know, haven't met him yet. He's just the Pejai pilot attacking the Tolmekian ships that are transporting Nausica and her friends as hostages. There's that really cool scene where they're looking up, and she sees just the glint of the shadow against the sun. So he's flying smart and hiding in the sun before he dives in to attack. And also just later when there's another air fight, seeing the tension of detail to put the shadows of the planes on the clouds, that's a bump in the lamp moment in animation. Have you ever heard that term, bumping the lamp?
No.
That actually goes back to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and what happened. And there's a scene in Who Framed Roger Rabbit where because Roger Rabbit is simultaneously live action with animation overlaid it. So the animators had to work very hard to incorporate these cell-drawn characters into a three-dimensional world. And mind you, this is way before CGI and all that. So there's a scene where Roger Rabbit bumps a lamp, and the Disney animators paid such attention to detail that they animated all the shadows around the room to match the lamp as it flung around. So it's become a term in animation that when they go the extra mile in animation for detail, it's called a bump the lamp moment.
I feel like this movie went the extra mile with animation in so many ways. Not just the flying, but also I love when this movie focuses on wind in so many ways. Everyone's clothes react, then ripple in the wind uniquely and animated differently every 3 seconds. It is not a static effect that is like redone. And we think about what am I thinking of? The Fox version of Robin Hood is the exact same animation as I believe it's Snow White dancing with some of the dwarves. It's one of those. Like just recycled animation. Everything here seems like it has such purpose. And I thought that was wonderful. Any other animations that really went the extra mile for you, Lizzy?
Their use of color and expressing light. It was really, really visually interesting to me because they were able to really perfectly, I talk about it a little bit in my superlatives, but talking about the plant room that Nausica has. I mean, this idea of you imagine walking into this kind of almost sacred space and you see just like lights and sparkles and everything being illuminated. And to me, that was really what made it feel magical and kind of like a jaw-dropping moment for me. And that was just one of many scenes throughout the movie. I just love their use of color to be able to portray light shining. And I think that was just so interesting. And that had to have taken so much time and attention to detail.
The time and the attention to detail came because of the care, because it mattered. This is how it looks. The one that stands out to me, I wasn't even thinking about this before you said it, but something about the glittering is from far away when the enraged Ohms were stampeding and you see all the red lights of their eyes. There's a moment when they begin to circle Nausicaa's prone body and you start seeing from the center them turning blue when they stop stampeding. And that's not animated in the sense of like we're going to color swap or palette swap. It was like little like sprinkles of glitter that change color. And it's something where like that's an hour 45 minutes in and you're just you're still poised to be amazed by the visuals on screen, which is why one of the big reasons this was such a delight to watch. Now I know I've done it with JD and now I've done it with Lizzy. We keep dancing around superlatives. How about we just get straight to it?
Let's do it.
JD, who's the MVP of this movie?
I voted for Lord Yupa. For being voiced by Patrick Stewart, and for he did a great job. Like he had the gravitas of the kind of voice for the character. Like this kind of, like I said, I like to call this character the quiet badass. They don't have to demonstrate their power; they use it well. And like I said, his reputation precedes him. And yeah, I think he was a well done character. Like he was. Honestly, he kind of stepped up as a pseudo father figure for Nausica after her own father passes away too. So
absolutely, very cool character. How about you, Lizzy? MVP.
I put Alison Lohman. She is the American actor that dubs over Nausicaa's voice, and I put her. First of all, I love her as an actress. When I looked at her IMDb, she's most well known for Drag Me to Hell and Flicka, and I loved her voice because, you know, we've spoken so much about Nausicaa as a princess and just the type of princess that she was and the heart that she had, and I think that Alison did such a wonderful job of kind of marrying together this very strong, brave, but also very scared young woman, and I just think she did such a good job. I mean, she made watching the movie just flow so easily for me, and I really appreciated what she was able to bring to the character.
That's great to get from a voice actor. Well, for me, it's Hayao Miyazaki for the vision, for the care, and what led to an ongoing wonderful reputation and career. This was something I needed to crowdsource to pick what to choose. I'm so glad that we chose it. As I think the totality of this movie elevated. It's certainly greater than the sum of its parts, and I want to give that.
This is the start of his catalog.
This is just the beginning.
You see him evolve these themes much like as across his library as he progresses.
All right, who's your best supporting, JD?
I put Tato the fox squirrel. Because it's a cute animal design. And like you were saying, he's not an Abu, he's not an Iago. He's the sweet spot for me of being a sidekick without being annoying.
Yes, thank you.
Very well. It's an animal that behaves like an animal that believably does. It doesn't do the weird thing that Disney does where it turns all their horses into dogs.
It's just a mammal.
Yep.
Wonderful. Who's your best supporting, Lizzy?
I put Kurotawa, who was Kushana's sidekick. I have to say, like, I really appreciated his sarcasm, and I feel like and at least in the dubbed version, there's a lot of really funny, witty banter going on between the two of them, and where you kind of can't 100% tell if they like each other or not. Like you can tell that they respect each other, but, you know, like when Kushana's plane goes down, he's kind of like, all right. And I mean, it's just, I appreciated his sarcasm. I feel like he brought some comedic relief to the role, and I appreciated him for that.
Interesting thing about the end of what you just said there. This movie does not have a lot of comedy. Very little, comparatively. And I didn't find it lacking. I didn't feel as if I needed a silly sidekick. The amount of comedy we got was perfect on the low end.
Yeah, most of it came from the Peanut Gallery, that trio of old dudes.
Yeah, and when you got it, it was nice. But really, this was focused on more of a hero's journey, not on the antics that surround it. I went with the guy who played Lord Yuba in the Japanese version, Goro Naya. His voice is a common type of voice in these styles of like these features, which is deeper, breaking up the sentences, almost a South Korean style, and it was really well done. And then it matches his big mustache combo thing, which I really liked. It was less of a trope, more of a necessity. It's nice to have the wise old man. It's nicer when the wise old man is also the most incredible swordsman in the world. JD, what's your hidden gem here?
The one line of Tony J dialogue of the narrator, because I freaking love Tony J as a great voice actor too. For those who may not be familiar, Tony J was the voice of Count Lord Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he just has such a great voice. And like he's popped up as narrator in a couple of odd places in the Disney library. So like to have one single line of Tony J dialogue, I was like, yes.
Trivia insert from Dustin here. At the time, at least, Minister Frollo was the only Disney character to ever quote scripture, which is where he's holding the sword above. He's holding the sword above Quasimodo, and he holds it up, and he says, "And he will plunge the wicked into the fiery pit," right before the gargoyle falls underneath him. Strange little bit of trivia, at least for 97 or whenever that was. Yeah.
Scariest, most evil villain.
Great song, too.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Great song, too.
Disney villains always have the best songs.
Jade, we gotta stop. We're gonna go 30 minutes into another direction, which we should, but we can't. What's your hidden gem, Lizzy?
I put Jodi Benson. She is the voice actress that voices Ariel from The Little Mermaid, and she plays Listel and Abel's mother. She has a really quick cameo, I suppose, if you want to call it that, where she's able to come in and swoop in with a little girl and rescue Nausica. They trade clothes, and she leaves with them, and she apologizes for the way that her people have behaved.
Yeah.
So she's probably only on screen in a speaking role for maybe 60 seconds, but she has such a recognizable voice. So that was a fun nod to see her there.
Did either of you catch the Mark Hamill cameo?
I did, even though I didn't watch that version.
He was the voice of, in the English dub, it was the Pedgite mayor. So the guy that was like kind of in charge when they arrived at Pedgite.
For me, my hidden gem was our future post-apocalyptic flora and fauna. I think that's a really fun fantasy aspect of this. And JD, if we had 30 more minutes, you could go off more on that. But I think what's really great about this, it's a world that's not quite our own. With the mounts, with the insects, the flying centipede thing was awesome. I think there's an aspect to it. I think of the King Kong movie from 03 or 05, where they did some incredible insect work.
The Peter Jackson one?
Yeah.
With the insect grotto that traumatizes children?
Mm-hmm. And I think there's some aspect here that like this was just on the right edge of not being too traumatizing, but being like, oh, this is critical danger, though. So I thought that was cool. This is a weird one for this movie. JD, recast someone.
I honestly had no suggestion.
Ugh, that isn't going to work for me. I need you to think while I go over to Lizzy. You got to think of something real quick, JD. You're on the spot. Lizzy, go over to a recast. Something, anything.
So I have said this man before when I've done recast, and that is just because he's epic. But I think, in listening to the American dub version, there's a lot of really popular early 2000s stars, Uma Thurman, Shia LaBeouf, Patrick Stewart, who of course, can span any decade. But so I wanted to think about who I feel like was super iconic and could potentially span any decade or was perhaps very popular in the early aughts. And I went with my man, the legend himself, Tim Curry. I wanted him to replace Kurotoa. I love Tim Curry so much. He has that sarcastic kind of almost where he can, because the thing about Kurotoa is that he's definitely considered a bad guy in this movie, no doubt about it. But because he's very self-serving, but he's also, I would consider him also to be a coward. And I think that kind of combination makes for kind of a slimy, wormy character. And I think that Tim Curry can do that perfectly. I think that his voice, and he can do anything. I adore him. And the second that popped in my mind, I just was like, well, I've got it. That's him. So
wow.
Tim for everything.
Lizzy, I got some good news for you. In the English dub of another Miyazaki film, The Cat Returns, Tim Curry plays the villain.
Well, that's going to be my second.
Look at this
movie that I've got to watch.
Look at this.
I mean, he's into it because he was Hexus in Fern Gully. So I mean, that he's all about movies about cohabitation and protecting our world, and he's into it.
He's into it because he's into anything. He's into anything and everything. He played a Russian commander in a 90s version of a Red Alert Command and Conquer game. Space! He's ridiculous in what he chooses to do, and we love him for it. My recast is unfair because I can't pick an early 80s Japanese voice actress to replace Yoshiko Sakakibara because I don't know any. So that's unfair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fall back to something, which is I believe we should have more voice actors doing voice actor things instead of regular actors doing voice acting things. There's an up-and-coming voice actor right now. Her name is Ashley Birch. The timing doesn't work, but I think that having her play Nausica would be something wonderful. She's known right now for Tiny Tina, Critical Role, The Mythic Quest, among other things. It's a cop-out answer, but sometimes you just got to rely on something like that, something that's a little weak. We go back to you, JD. What's your recast?
All right, since you're pulling my leg here.
Yes.
I would probably... Let's have like a few line cameo of another of my favorite voice actors, Keith Davids. Sure. We can recast him
wonderful.
as Nausicaa's dad.
We love Keith David on Retro Movie Roundtable.
Freaking love Keith David.
That would be sick. Okay, let's go to something else that's not forcing us to replace something in the movie. What's your best shot, JD?
You mentioned it earlier, actually. It was that scene of Calm in the very beginning when she's exploring the jungle and she sits under the Ohm eye shield and the snow the spore snow falls down on her. It's such a very scenic thing. Because there's something Miyazaki, I saw in an interview he once described, it is particularly seen in Miyazaki in the Ghibli library, is while American and Western storytelling tends to be boom, 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 with action, getting from plot point to plot point to plot point to action to action to action to character moment, character moment, character moment. Japanese and like Eastern storytelling, they tend to give just as much attention to the beats in between. So this movie is not slow at all. It is fast paced. The pacing is well done, and there's a lot that happens, but there are these moments of calm and beauty, the breath in between. And that
you get a chance to rest.
And that was a scene that was a good example. That was a stellar example of that.
Well, hey, Nathan will know this. It's why there are notes and it's why there are rests. You gotta have both. Lizzy, what's your best shot?
So I had mentioned the private room before, so I'll go with my second favorite best shot, which is towards the end of the film once the world is seemingly going to be all right in the sense that the Olms are now calm and the great warrior is destroyed and things seem to be okay, except for the fact that our precious princess has fallen and the Olms decide to use their golden tentacles to revive her. I think that there's this shot when they've all released their tentacles and they're rising Nausica up into the air, and you get the vantage point that the villagers in the valley get, and where it's like this, almost like this gigantic tidal wave of gold, because all of the tentacles are kind of marrying together with small spaces in between.
Yeah.
And the way that they're moving and just the attention to detail, I had specifically thought to myself, knowing that this was hand drawn, of just saying that had to have taken forever. And it is a beautiful shot. So to me, it had big payoff as well. So that would definitely be my runner up for best shot.
Oh, what a great shot it is! Both of your shots make me think that I chose poorly. Mine. So I thought I had it picked, which is when Nausicaa's in pursuit of the dirigible that's holding the bait ohm, and she holds her arms out wide, sort of showing that hey, I'm not I'm not in a position to attack you. And one of the Pejite people says it's Lestel. Because of the clothes, as she lets the glider go. I thought that was striking. But then just within 5 minutes, we get a situation where the pilots are trying to fix their ship, and one of them looks up and there's Nausica holding a machine gun in both hands, slung to her side. Like, whoa! Now that is a sight. It's like action movie, like Jesse Ventura in Predator, her holding that machine gun. So, yeah, mine are a little off the cuff. Yours are better.
I mean,
That's one of the best scenes.
that scene struck me too. It also was at that point where I realized, and I wonder if you guys noticed, may have picked up on this trend, or maybe I was the only one that noticed this, was that we've been talking about how Nausica is the princess of love. She's full of empathy. She's full of love. She's anti-violence. She screams multiple times throughout the movie, "The killing must stop. We got to stop killing each other." For someone who's so anti-violence, anti-killing, she puts herself in self-destructive situations a lot.
She's not going to let anything stop her. Yeah.
Like she puts herself in harm's way in a lot of situations. I'm like, okay, can we get some of that maybe some self-love there?
It's because she puts herself directly in the path of that Ohm going towards the acid lake and her shoes start to burn. That's what ends the rage. Like, she specifically puts herself in those positions.
Yeah, well, a part of love is also sacrifice, and I think, kind of like taking up your cross in a sense. So I think that she recognizes that, and even Baba says that at one point. I forget exactly what she says, but she says she sacrificed herself to save her people, and so I think she definitely puts herself in really compromising, dangerous situations. But I think she does it because she recognizes somebody has to. So if I'm the princess, I'm the leader of these people. So who better to do it than me? So I think she has that mentality of well, someone's got to do it. It might as well be me.
That's a good point. Let's move on to best scene here. JD.
I put the childhood memory flashback of when Nausica, there's this whole scene where she has a flashback after she gets knocked out, and then later she wakes up in the underground purified forest part. But she has a memory flashback to when she was little, and her dad she's out playing the fields, and her dad comes, picks her up, and even her mom's there. The only shot of her mom, or mention of her mom, and they pick her up and come on, we're gonna go for a ride, and she's like, okay. And then she finds out they totally encapsulate a kid that has done something wrong and doesn't want to be caught. She's like, no, wait, let's not go this way. And it turns out she hit a baby Ohm in a tree. And then they take it, and she's screaming it hasn't done anything wrong. Please don't kill it. It didn't do anything. And it's her dad that says, the humans and the insects can't live together. You know that. That's just a core memory, and that just totally encapsulates Nausicaa's entire character. That's just okay, she's been this way since she was 3.
The entire world has been this way, and she is the only one who kind of gets it. Yeah, cool scene. Lizzy, best scene.
So again, I'm going to go with my second best, because I mentioned one of my favorite scenes is the very beginning with the fox squirrel, just because I felt like I feel like they did that because they could have so easily just presented a fox squirrel. But the idea that they did it in that particular way of having the fox squirrel bite her and she does not fight back, she remains calm and allows the fox squirrel to kind of come to that realization on its own. I think that they tried to show representation of her character. So that was probably my favorite. My second favorite was the full opening sequence, in the fact that I love when movies establish kind of a backstory of lore that you get to watch. I just think it's so exciting, and this one was no different. I love that beginning little scene where they show all the giant warriors and kind of leaving you now with understanding the context of the world that they're living in. I thought that was a really exciting scene, and I was very curious.
Yeah, it sets up what we're about to experience very well. My best scene actually involves the peanut gallery. It's when the uncle, the sergeant at arms, and one other hostage is telling the other Princess Kashana that she's nothing like their princess. This is how you do things. We only use a little fire. We appreciate the wind and water. Because they've mostly been just kind of yuck heads. They've been just kind of bumbling in a way. Mm-hmm. And that was a moment for them to show that we represent these values of where we're from. You'd like to think if the plane with the embryo never landed there with the bugs attached. You'd like to think that if the world was perfect, that maybe the toxic jungle or the Sea of Decay would cover most of the world, and that the little paradise, the Valley of the Wind, would be like Noah's Ark. They'd be like, well, actually, no, you guys were righteous. You guys did it right. That's how I like to think of it. We don't know that, but that's why I'd like to think of it. And those guys in that situation kind of show, like, this is how we still care about things, even when you bring your war to us. I thought that was very cool. Best wardrobe or makeup? Take that as you will, JD.
I'm going to add, like, this. I noticed this for the first time upon this viewing. Like, I watched it several times growing up.
New detail.
And new detail to me, but you outright got it on your summary, Lizzy, that her initially pink dress, that she's wearing the Pejite clothing as a disguise, I didn't catch the first time around that it turned blue because it got soaked with the Ohm blood of the baby Ohm. Like, I totally missed that as a kid. I don't know how I didn't catch that.
I missed it until Lizzy said it too. It's an eagle eye.
It's that like suction-y sound, and you can there's like that suction-y sound of like as it's changing. And it is kind of like a blink and you miss it. But because that was one thing I noticed. I was like, wait, her dress is blue. Her dress was just red. And so I kind of took a couple of rewindings to finally catch it.
Yeah, I did end up rewinding to catch it too. But that also goes back into the creature features, because they probably gave the Ohms blue blood, because that's a shout out to horseshoe crabs. Because horseshoe crabs have blue blood.
Yeah. What was your best wardrobe or makeup moment, Lizzy?
I loved their use of gold. I think that was such a reoccurring color that I kept seeing throughout the movie. And I know that it's technically not wardrobe or makeup, but I suppose with animation, it's kind of a sub makeup, if you will.
We'll make it work.
But you know, there's the Kushana is always wearing she's dressed in white, but she has all these gold accessories on her, and then you've got the fields of gold and that Nausica has during her dreams, and then the final one at the end because of the Ohm tentacles. It just kind of feels like gold is a common theme throughout the movie, and so I loved the kind of representation of that.
And it's striking. Like, I think of gold when I think of this movie. For me, it's the masks. It's the respirator type masks that they wear, and it was a choice for them to be like floppy or made of canvas or something, because it meant that they had to animate it more. It would have been so much easier to make it static, to make them just on the face instead of kind of flaps on the side. They even put masks on the little mounts. I thought it was neat. There was some seriousness to when her mask gets knocked off after saving Absol or Abel. And I thought that was neat. It made you feel like you were part of a world that needed protection from a savage frontier.
I did notice that the Pejite masks were just like...
They were just,
fabrics. I'm like, what degree of PPE do these people actually need, like, to survive the toxic jungle? Unless it's like a special fabric.
Yeah, it was kind of like sand, like nomad-esque, the way that they had theirs. Okay, JD, change one thing about this movie.
Tone down Nausicaa's crying a little bit. Like, no, I'm okay with her crying because she's an emotional person, but it seemed like there was a lot of it in, like, the second half of the movie.
I mean, it's important to show the wide range of emotion, but I can see that being too much.
And I get that. And, like, people are allowed to cry, princesses are allowed to cry, and it makes sense for her character, but it was just, it somehow struck me weird. Like, she's like, okay, she's crying a lot.
It's also something that I didn't think about until just now. I believe this entire movie happens in the course of 36 hours. So she's tired.
Wild.
Yeah,
Like,
that's true.
She's tired.
She's tired. And we all know how the emotions can boil up when you're tired. Lizzy, change one thing about this movie.
This was really hard, but I don't even necessarily feel like I want a petition for this, but it would just be more or less something that would have been interesting. Nausica has this really unique relationship with the insects, and I think it would have been kind of neat if maybe it's very clear that there's some kind of telepathic communication on some kind of level. And she's able to charm them and speak to them. I think that would have been kind of cool if you were able to like hear them speak back to her, not in a Disney, everybody can hear what they're saying kind of way, but in like a special kind of, they have this own form of communication. I think that would have been kind of cool to explore.
Oh, it's okay, miss. You are in the sea of decay.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Like nothing like that. I mean, because that would have just
under decay.
Completely.
Under decay.
Yeah, I mean, that would
Don't you worry about that thing. Everything's gonna be right there.
That would have really, I think, there's this special magic, and I think that would have kind of commercialized it too much. But I think the two of them are, like specifically the Olms that she's speaking to towards the end. I think that would have been super neat to maybe have.
It's almost on like an elevated level. The communication is through like image projection.
Yes.
But would it have been nicer to have some type of like words, even if they're just single word communications? I agree with you. I think that it's clear that most of the world does not understand that the toxic jungle or the Sea of Decay is something that you cannot fight and win against. We do have an ancient legend that tells of a blue-robed figure that walks from a golden field. But I think either from the Takmarians, is that right? Help me.
Tolmekians?
Thank you. I think that's maybe somebody affiliated with the Tolmekians or the Pedgites, maybe a historian or a scientist, has some knowledge of what this could be. Because in 1,000 years, nobody's figured out, like, hey, the world heals itself, which is what the Sea of Decay is. So instead of it being like ancient legend, I think it would be cool if there was somebody else. And I think for the time, the time that we would need to remove some other character's development here to do it. But somebody else who's not like a fantastic swordsman or a young pilot who can be swayed by Nausicaa's mission. Somebody who's like, no, actually what you're thinking is right. And we have the key. Here's the key. Go get it. But then the more I go that far, the more I realize I'm just describing a different movie. But that's something I would change. Somebody needs to understand the science of this. Last one. What's our best quote, JD?
We talked about the one I initially wrote down, which was, that's Lord Yupa, kill him and you'll be famous. Because that's like, you get like one, like...
That's cool.
It's a cool line, but B, you get the whole distillation of a character by reputation alone in one sentence. So I'm going to back it up with a second one, which is, too much fire gives birth to nothing. Because that's also a common theme. It's demonstrated. It's like they say like the air is saturated with rage, and that like one of the morals of this movie is rage and hate and fire, and it ultimately burns. It doesn't heal. It's detrimental and destructive. Whereas, cool wind, air, water, calmer, empathetic feelings are what ultimately help. And that's also a theme that carries over into other future Miyazaki films, especially Princess Mononoke.
I love when the quote really has some like philosophy behind it. Lizzy, what's yours?
Kushana she reveals that she is a wounded princess, and she reveals that she's missing a limb. And then she responds with, yes, and whatever lucky man becomes my husband,
right?
She'll see far worse than that.
Yeah.
And I think that was just a perfectly sassy line. I loved it so much.
Yeah, it raised my eyebrows. Like, whoa, here we go.
Yeah,
that was almost one of my picks for best wardrobe moment.
Very suggestive, but not enough that it would be considered inappropriate. And
right.
Perfectly sassy.
And also a bit odd, because what it reveals for you, and I don't know if it reveals it for the youngest of children, but it shows that she's not really bound at all. I can remove this hand. I have my full capacities. I'm not actually bound at the wrist or my feet because I can take them off. Yeah, interesting. Mine is actually tied to the kind of the mission, the environmentalist part of this, if I didn't make that clear earlier. The quote is, who made such a terrible mess of the world? And it's a sad quote because it's just unfortunately a little too real for me, but it reminds me of two other quotes from other movies. One of them is The Matrix, where we learn that humans scorched the sky because they thought the machines depended on solar energy, but they were wrong. But the other one it makes me think of is one of my favorites. I can't wait for the threshold to hit where we can cover Mad Max, Fury Road. It's an exclamation from several of the characters in the movie. Who killed the world? And we did. And it's so strange to say, guys, I'm on Team Sea of Decay. I'm on Team Toxic Jungle. Because we did it. We don't have to. But it is now time for us to give a little opportunity back to JD to continue to plug any of your maybe you're giving a talk or something at the upcoming conventions, anything else that we can learn about you?
You can find most of my updates on both my stories and my art and painting dragon feathers across social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, TikTok, all that stuff. I have process videos of how I make some of my art. So my next show is going to be KatsuCon in February. This is 2023. But keep an eye out. I do visual art. I open for commissions. I'm closed right now because I'm prepping for con, but I will open up again for them soon. So custom tattoos, dioramas, illustrations, whatever you want. I just did a cover art piece for an upcoming digital magazine called Altered Reality for speculative fiction, so sci-fi,
Awesome.
fantasy, horror. It's going to be free to the public. Check it out later January. It should be up. That's Altered Reality online magazine. And fingers crossed, one of my New Year's goals is to, I do write as well. I have been polishing and reworking a cryptid-themed manuscript that I'm hoping to have done and hopefully out in the wild by hopefully the end of 2023.
Oh, awesome. Full speed ahead for that. I love hearing that. Yeah, how hard would it be to fit in an oil painting of Nathan and I on the front of the Titanic with a kraken?
Oh, I could do that.
We'll talk about the money details later. All right, JD, let's speak about how you recommend this movie. 0.5 to 5 stars. We work on a half-scale rating. What do you rate Nausica of the Valley of the Wind?
4.5 stars. Great animation, great voice acting, in the English dub at least. Excellent storytelling. But like I said, this is Miyazaki at the start of his career.
So yeah, we've got quite the ladder to climb afterwards. Yeah, maybe
I will say some of his later work outranks it.
Maybe that'll be a surprise for Lizzy and Aaron to be like, hey, it's time to do another Ghibli movie. Lizzy, what's your rating?
So I give this 4 stars. I chose 4 because I have no real basis for comparison. This being my first real dip of the toe into the anime world, but I really enjoyed myself. I thought the movie itself was honestly just really lovely. Like I felt really entertained the entire time. So I feel like if this is something that I would highly recommend it to anybody interested in any kind of introduction to anime. So for me, 4 stars for sure.
I'm going to mirror you with the 4 stars. And I thought for a sec that I was being unfair because I do think that it accomplishes everything that it wants to. And I liked it. I don't think there's some like upper ceiling threshold that I don't give animated movies like high enough ratings. But any time I tried to distinguish the things I didn't like about the movie or that I wanted changed, I realized I was just describing a different movie, like I did with the Change One Thing superlative. I think if there was a series of manga or lore or books of lore that goes deeper into this world, which maybe exists, I would read it. I like it. It exists. I'll read it. There's a lot to this world that I like. But it didn't push into the excellent levels yet. But hey, there's plenty more Ghibli to explore. Speaking of exploring, I think it's time. Do you have any movies that I can help us select for next time, Lizzy?
I do. So this movie, as we just discussed, we all loved unanimously. But we said it earlier, there's no comedic relief. So next week, we're going to go with slapstick, silly movies. So are you ready to hear our options?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So option number 1 is Scary Movie from 2000. A year after disposing of the body of a man they accidentally killed, a group of dumb teenagers are stalked by a bumbling serial killer. Option number 2, Wrongfully Accused, 1998. Ryan Harrison is framed for a murder he must prove himself innocent by finding a mysterious one-eyed, one-armed, one-legged man after escaping from a bus accident on the way to jail. And option number 3, UHF 1989. An unemployed visionary becomes the manager of a local television station. The station becomes a success with all sorts of hilarious sight gags and wacky humor.
I'm not picking this because it's an 80s movie. I'm picking this because I think it's been on my list of the longest to see. We need to do UHF next week.
All right. Okay.
Awesome.
Logging it in.
That was awesome. Thank you for those options. And JD, thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you again for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And thank you, all the lords, ladies, and knights of the Retro Movie Roundtable. We invite you to reach out to us. We want to hear from you. Subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pandora, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's mostly audio only, but Russell has been going back and updating them with slides. They look wonderful. Give us a like on Facebook, Instagram, and follow us on Twitter at movie_retro. Email us at retromovieroundtable@yahoo.com. Producing and providing this podcast is fun, but not free. We invite you to support the show at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/retromovieroundtable. Any contribution is much appreciated and will go towards making the show better for you, the listeners. As always, thank you for listening. Be good to each other and watch more movies. Lizzy?
Funny. You like samurai swords? I like baseball.